This video is all about how Astrobot perfected VR platforming. A week ago, I had an influx of comments about how VR should really only be a first-person experience, which got me thinking about how many times I've heard that sentence over the years and how a VR game should only be experienced from a first-person perspective. And I would never argue that first-person is where VR truly shines. It is the most natural perspective to have using a VR headset. I still remember the first time I experienced first-person gaming with Doom, and it was a truly incredible experience. And the idea of being in that game back then would have completely blown my mind. And that's what VR does. It takes that amazing perspective and doubles down on how cool that perspective really is, because after all, wearing a headset puts you in the head of the character, sometimes your own character. You can have arms, legs and a body, and it brings us closer to everything in the world. Its occupants, the tools, the items and the weapons at your disposal. When we play a first-person shooter, we aren't just aiming down the sights with the mouse and a gamepad using our thumbs, we are in full control and aiming down the sights for real. We are also physically swinging the weapons in our games. Some of them even have weight, and when we are casting spells with our hands or climbing mountains and skyscrapers, and in all these cases a first-person perspective is truly immersive. But a third-person view of everything in VR can be just as rewarding, and also as immersive if it's done correctly. And that is what today's video is all about. Before we get into it, please remember to drop a like, subscribe for more VR content, and if you have any opinions about this video, please leave them down in the comment section. Now, the first time you experience a third person in VR, it can be quite jarring, but the smoothest of the experience depends entirely on the positioning of the player, who you are, and what you're doing in the world, and how you move. I've played and tested so many games over the years, it would be crazy to attempt to feature all of them as an example, but I'm going to do my best to explain how Astrobot took third-person VR gaming to the next level, and it still unfortunately hasn't been bettered, but we've definitely had some good attempts. First of all, we have Ben, which features a little interaction between you and the main character. It features massive levels and is definitely more focused on the platforming challenges, similar to something like Crash Bandicoot or Mario, which is also soon coming to PSVR 2. But I always felt the combat was a little lacking, but I'm still very excited to be checking it out on PSVR 2 soon. Then there's Chronos, which is a much lesser known and a dark VR adventure game. The camera is stuck in positions similar to the original Resident Evil games, and the atmosphere is tremendous. The real hook is you can only enter the world once a year, and each time you die, you age 1 year, which adds a hell of a lot of pressure, but it's pretty cool to see your character age throughout the game. There's no platforming, but the combat is satisfying. Moss, for example, made the player more than a camera. In the game, you are called the Reader, a ghostly apparition who can move parts of the level, help solve puzzles, high-five Quill, the protagonist, and even rub her head. This gives the player more than just being a camera in VR. You now have physical presence, and your role in the game is very important. And because Quill was so cute, it also gives you a feeling of being a guardian, of protecting her, making sure she's safe throughout her journey, and that creates a very real relationship dynamic between you and her. So when talking about all these three games so far, you can see there's different reasons the developers have gone with using a third-person camera and importing their games sometimes in VR, such as Chronos, which is actually a flat game. So what makes Astrobot really stand out amongst these titles? Well, it's actually a decent mix of all the features from all these games and some extras. First of all, the most important thing for me in third person is player presence. You play a huge robot in Astrobot and you're following Astro around the levels, which means the camera is quite dynamic to experience, but it's still on rails, but somehow it just doesn't feel like it. There's moments where you have to physically peek around objects to keep an eye on Astro, because to grab certain collectibles, he's almost out of sight and can go in any direction. Then there's the player interactions. You can headbutt parts of the world and even help fight enemies to assist Astro, and the levels remind you quite often that you are actually in this game. You can have water hitting your face, you'll be headbutting balls, and even getting seaweed in your eyes. And then there's also your controllers, which transform to give you different abilities such as ninja stars, a water jet, and a torch in the dark parts of the game that you have to use to keep Astro on the move. And that's all before we even talk about Astro himself, because obviously while you're playing the game, you're having to control all his movements. Now, it goes without saying there's tons of platforming in this game, but it's all on different surfaces: clouds, concrete, glass, massive leaves and disappearing platforms, trampolines, tightrope walking, grinding on rails similar to Sonic, and then there's the swimming. There's simply so much happening all around you all the time as well. It constantly makes the world feel alive and animated. Things are getting smashed by upcoming bosses, there's planes dropping enemies around you and hidden collectibles that you need to use your double jump jets to reach. When it comes to the enemy variety, they're not too dissimilar, but they all have a different way to cause you damage, which means you have to deal with them a little differently. Then there's the bosses, which are absolutely huge in scale and all have interactions between you and Astrobot where you have to work together to beat them, and that's where it all combines into one of the best third-person gaming experiences anyone can have, and that's without mentioning the amazing graphics and the music. For me, music in VR games is incredibly lacking, and while Astro's music isn't quite as iconic as, say, Sonic or Mario, it's definitely up there as some of the most memorable in virtual reality. Now, unfortunately, Astrobot is locked away on the original PSVR, but I still have high hopes and do believe that Astrobot in some way will be coming to PSVR 2. And with all that being said, thank you ever so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I really hope you have experienced some of these games. I know some of you are going to have some more questions and comments, so make sure you hit me up down in the comments. See you on the next one.